Hello students, today in history we'll be looking at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. The Berlin Conference was a meeting at which the major European powers negotiated and formalized claims to territory in Africa. It was held between November 15th, 1884 to 26th February 1885 in Berlin, the headquarters of Germany. The Berlin Conference marked the climax of the European competition for territory in Africa, a process commonly known as the Scramble for Africa. During the 1870s and early 1880s, European nations such as Great Britain, France and Germany began looking to Africa for natural resources for their growing industrial sectors, as well as potential markets for the goods these factories produced. The Berlin Conference was a conference that was held between November 1884 to February 1885 in Berlin, the capital of Germany. The Berlin Conference was held when the European nations started warring between themselves over the resources in Africa, over the natural resources in Africa. Before then, they used to trade their weapons to the African merchants for their natural resources such as granite, palm oil from the east, their gold, and some of the natural resources that were found in Africa. But at a time, they started getting greedy for these natural resources and they didn't want to trade. They didn't want to buy again from the African leaders. They started scrambling for territories in Africa. They wanted to own the African territories, their people and their natural resources. So because of that, because of the scramble, because of everybody, all these European countries were scrambling for these natural resources, it created conflicts amongst them. So they decided to hold a conference and sign a treaty so as to negotiate on how these countries can take over the natural resources in Africa without fighting amongst themselves. As a result of the conflicts among these governments, among these European countries, these governments sought to safeguard their commercial interests in Africa and began sending scouts to the continent to secure territories from indigenous peoples on their supposed representatives. Inevitably, the scramble for territory led to conflicts among the European powers, particularly between the British and French in West Africa, Egypt, the Portuguese, and between Great Britain and France. And this led Bismarck to intervene. And in the late 1884, he called for a meeting of European powers in Berlin. In the subsequent meetings, Great Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Ethiopia too negotiated their claims to African territory, which were then formalized and mapped. During the conference, the leaders also agreed to allow free trade among the colonies and established a framework for the negotiating future European claims in Africa. I've summarized this in the previous slide. So this was what brought about the Berlin Conference. Because of the scramble for the African territory, because of the conflicts which the scramble for the African territory caused among these European countries, Bismarck decided to call for a conference, call for a meeting, so that they can decide on how to take over these African territories peacefully without having to fight each other. Now let's look at the reason for the Berlin Conference. Otto von Bismarck created the Berlin Conference to settle disputes between the European powers with interest in Africa, to create pseudo borders of ownership, allowing various European nations to claim almost the entire continent, including its resources and people. This was the major reason. The major reason for the Berlin Conference was to claim ownership on the African continent, including its resources and the people. That was the major reason for the Berlin Conference, and in a way that it will not cause problem between the European powers who had interest in Africa, in the African territories. The division of African territory, the leaders, this was because of the division of the African territory. The leaders agreed that whoever claimed territory in Africa would inform it and prove to everyone that he could control it. During that conference, they agreed that whoever claimed ownership or claims ownership of territory in Africa, the person would be able to prove that he's able to control the territory he's claiming. So this was the major reason for the Berlin Conference. What the major reason was to divide the African continent amongst themselves, take over the leadership of African countries, to claim their people, claim their natural resources, and also if you also claim a territory, you should be able to control it. These were the reasons, the major reasons for the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Treaty. A treaty is an agreement signed between two or more nations for peace or alliance. That is the meaning of a treaty. A contract is a contract or an agreement signed between two or more nations for the purpose of peace or for alliance. Now, the Treaty of Berlin was signed on 13th July 1878. The European leaders agreed that slave trade should be officially stopped. They also agreed that European countries had rights to acquire territories in Africa. They also agreed that European countries should ensure effective occupation of the territory. That's when you occupy a territory, you should also control it effectively. The treaty was signed by Great Britain, Ireland, Austria, Hungary, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, Ottoman Empire, including the USA. This map on the screen shows the location of these countries, these European countries. Now let us look at the role of NRC in the acquisition of Nigerian territories. The Royal Niger Company, NRC, was established in 1879 by Sir Tubman Goldie with other British merchants who had interest in the Niger area. It was first called United African Company, UAC, but was changed to National African Company, NAC, in 1881, and Niger Royal Company, NRC, in 1886. The company dominated trade in the Southern Protectorate, stopping competition from France and Germany traders. It also extended its trading activities to the Northern Protectorate. The company transferred the territories to the British government for the sum of £865,000. This was the role the Royal Niger Company, NRC, played in the acquisition of Nigerian territory. The Royal Nigeria Company was a company established in Nigeria by the British merchants. These British merchants had interest in dominating the African territory, dominating the natural resources of the Nigerian territory, dominating the people of Nigerian territory. So they came in by establishing this company in Nigeria, in the western part of Nigeria. From which time they extended their territory to the western part of Nigeria. As time went on, they sold through this company. They were able to acquire Nigeria for the sum of £865,000. This has brought us to the end of this lesson today on the Berlin Conference. Let us go over to the assessment section. Question number 1. How much did Britain buy Nigeria? Question number 2. Who created the Berlin Conference? Drop your answer in the comment section. That will be all for today. Thank you for watching and join us in our next demo.